Today we're going to talk about how to make anime in a very simplified sense. Some of the steps we will go through, we would dive into a little further than others. But for the most part, we're going to be using the animation I created in the last video that focused more on how to animate in Clip Studio Paint as a model for this video as we go through each of the steps. Here's a popular anime production workflow breakdown in French. And here's an English adaptation, a little simplified, with its Japanese name counterpart. Depending on the person, the studio, or the animation itself, there's slight changes here and there. So here is my version, even further simplified for you guys. Depending on the anime episodes usually have at least 300 cuts and at least 5,000 animation frames. You add more depending on how popular the anime is or if it's a feature film. Overall, it varies. It usually costs at least $300,000 to produce about a 19-20 minute anime episode, and even then, the animators, especially the new animators, don't get paid nearly enough. Imagine working 15 hours a day for just $40.
ってことはじゃあワンカット作ったらかなりお金入るんじゃないですか。1ヶ月とかかかります。すごい世界ですね。
But this video is not going to focus on things like pitching or the budgets. Anything outside this workflow here is not going to be touched on as much. And first up, you've got your scenario, your treatment, your synopsis. Basically a brief explanation about what's going on, what's going to happen. And then your script kind of fleshes it out, gives it a little more foundation, dialogue, narration, all that good stuff. How you structure your script is up to you. You can go with a more formal sense of like maybe how screenplays and scripts are put together in Hollywood, or you can just write whatever works for you, especially if you're a one-man army. Again, depending on the animation, the studio, the animator, all of that, everybody kind of has their own method of doing things. So here's my scenario draft. Initially, it was just written for my eyes only, right? But you guys can take a peek. I put this together based off of characters from my series Apple Black. You can check out Volume 1 and Volume 2, link in the description. And now here's the script with narration and barely any dialogue, because there really isn't any dialogue. It's just a character looking cool and then like the narration going on in the background. That's the only monologue, if you will. And it's just saying the Eli prophecy that's within my series. That's mentioned a couple times in the series. It has to do with the main character and all of that, and that's just kind of like in the background. I wanted a very simple animation, minimal animation actually going on. I just wanted something that I could use as a good model to teach how to animate within Clip Studio Paint. This step usually goes through some kind of review before moving to the next step in the workflow. Next thing to look out for is like the concept design assets. So if the scene takes place in a certain place, you have people designing that place. So if it's adapted from a series, they're just going to lift off of what's going on in the manga and then still develop it with color and all of that and how it's going to look for the animation. So just creating those kind of assets. If the character needs to be designed, then it'll be designed. Luckily in this case, I already have my character designed, so I didn't spend too much time on there. But usually if you're working in a team, a character design sheet will be developed, and that will be something that everybody uses. You'll have all the colors on the character, even maybe some sketches with different facial expressions and different poses to really get the vibe of that character so that everybody on the team is consistent. Even further down the line in the phase where the animations get colored in with that department, they're going to be using some of these, at least colored versions of those character sheets, using the eyedropper and lifting colors directly to put into the animation, so to make sure that everybody on the team is using the exact same colors. This phase is just here to do all the concept work that needs to be done. This step usually goes through some kind of review before moving to the next step in the workflow. The next phase will be figuring out the storyboard animatic, and the storyboard animatic is basically just doing the storyboards for what's going to happen in the animation. And then you have some notes on the sides for like the timing, what's being said, any dialogue, or how many scenes, how many cuts, where did they take place, how long did we spend on a scene. That's where all of that gets figured out. Again, each animation studio, animator, or whatever has their own format or template on how to put this together. You can find many templates online to use. You just kind of need to figure out what works best for you. Here's the one I used. On this storyboard, I'm trying to figure out what parts I'm going to pan, where I'm going to zoom, what's actually going to be happening, what the character's going to be saying. You can see on the side where we get to see where the cuts are, same scene, but what cut is it within that scene, some of the dialogue on the side, in this case, little narration, kind of monologue that's happening in the background, some of the sound stuff, that space on the right to figure out how many seconds it's going to be. And then I have a couple notes here and there to make sure I'm on point with what I'm planning. And yeah, based on the template you're using, you figure out what you need, and maybe you find the appropriate template for you. After this, you get a more accurate picture for the blueprint of the whole animation. These are just the storyboards first. To create the animatic, that's where you're putting together all the shots and then actually timing them out, editing them, almost like you're putting the animation together, even with the sound and voice acting. Sometimes you might not have the voiceover work yet, so you might have to do the voiceover work yourself and then switch them in place later on, which is what I did here. This storyboard is just the skeleton version, like the blueprint version of the whole animation with the sound in place. And then you kind of build and add all the meat afterwards with the next following steps. Once all that is done, then you kind of have a good idea of how the backgrounds are going to be put together. You know what backgrounds to create to fill up all the assets. So sometimes a different team is simultaneously creating background assets and any other miscellaneous assets that will be used to put the animation together, especially in the compositing phase, which is one of the last ones. Sometimes the assets are created traditionally, sometimes they're created visually. It just depends. Most times it goes digital just because it's cheaper to do so. Now, while all that's happening, you take the storyboard animatic, you then plug it into your animation software, and then based off of the timing of certain things, you then start to create your rough keyframes. Depending on the artist, it might not be that rough, but usually just the rough keyframes to know where things go. You create those keyframes in your animation software. In this case, I'd recommend Clip Studio Paint. Keyframes are just frames of like the starting and ending points of any smooth transition. Key animators decide what parts of a drawing to show in a frame, and it will usually be the starting point and the ending point of an action, while the in-betweens are literally just the frames in between the keyframes. So based off of the storyboard, here are some rough keyframes forming a scene from Dr. Stone. You can compare the two as a finished look compared to the rough keyframes put together. Sometimes from the rough keyframes, depending on your studio, what you guys have planned, you can maybe even go 3D. And here, this is a shot of me putting together my rough keyframes.
で、原画さんがこの大元の動きを作る人が原画マンって言うんですけど、私が今原画の仕事をさせていただいてます。
After you've created the rough keyframes, you then solidify them with clean lines. I recommend vector lines. And then after you've gotten those keyframes, the next step would be to create the in-betweens. And sometimes the in-betweens are passed on to a separate team or some assistants, even outsourced to different countries where it's cheaper to have them do it. So after that, I solidify those lines to form the keyframes and the in-betweens. I use the rough keyframes to form the keyframes with my vector lines, and then I use like an onion skin, which is in Clip Studio Paint. Again, my Clip Studio Paint video for animation goes into more detail about all that stuff. And I just use the onion skin to figure out what I'm gonna do with the in-betweens, figure out how many cells I want in between, all of that. That's what you see me doing right here. And that's what the next step is. This step usually goes through some kind of, okay, you get it. You then go into coloring, and sometimes it's done by a different department, and we just put in the colors that are necessary. If you want a more in-depth tutorial on how to actually animate, my video before this, I think I spent a whole lot of time teaching you guys step by step on how to animate within Clip Studio Paint. So we go through most of all these steps, especially the steps that have to do with the actual animation within Clip Studio Paint. All you're seeing is me filling in the colors for each of the frames, making sure everything is in order. After adding in the color flats, you then do the next step within that same coloring phase known as cell shading, where you're adding in the shades, the highlights, and all of that, and then you're done with the step. Here I'm actually using lines to form what parts are going to be shaded in, because it's easier to animate those lines and then fill in whatever you need to fill in, whether it be the shades, however you want to do that. Here I'm actually shading on a separate layer, but sometimes the character design sheet would already tell you what shade to use. And so that way everything is flat, so you kind of just use the eyedropper to just pick it and fill in. Here's an example of that, where the shading isn't necessarily on a separate layer, they're just literally all flats. But they're still using vector lines to separate them, and the reason that's just a digital thing, because it's easier to use a vector line, especially within Clip Studio Paint, to fill inside those vector lines and have it be clean, and then have it also fill under those vector lines so everything is connected. You don't have any like tiny gaps of nothing in between. Those who use the fill tool regularly know what I'm talking about. Again, my other video goes into more detail. But overall, if there are any steps within this video that you guys would love to see me do a video on and go into more detail about it specifically, I'll be happy to do that. What you see now, I'm not necessarily using flats. I'm actually filling on a separate layer, different blending modes, slight opacity, and now I'm just filling in my character. Now it's looking a little more finished. This step, okay, I don't have to keep saying this every time, Then we go into compositing. That's where you take all the animation frames you've created, wherever you've created them, and then you put them into software for compositing. Sometimes you can composite in video editing software like Final Cut, but I recommend After Effects. This is where we take those animations and really make them look like what you see in animation. And you see all the visual effects that you would find in a finished animation. This is where all that magic happens. It's really complicated at first, a little intimidating. So I decided to do a little more narration here. But if you guys want specific videos on how to composite animations or anime within After Effects, you guys can let me know if you guys would be interested in videos like that. I might put some together. Like, this is where the sauce happens. The compositing stage is where you put all those assets together. You bring in the background, you bring in all the miscellaneous assets that were created as well, and then you use them here. You can do all sorts of stuff here. Camera movements, camera shakes, all that kind of stuff for your animation within After Effects. Clip Studio Paint can do a little bit of that, but After Effects is usually the industry standard for now. Compositing is where you kind of put all the pieces of the puzzle together and have it blend together seamlessly, have it look finished. This is, like I said, where most of the magic happens, as you can see with this example. You can make things lighter, you can make things darker, you can animate certain effects that you create within After Effects, or you can just play with what you have in so many different ways. Here I'm trying to add a certain light from the background to flash on the character more, have certain masks you can mess with. While animating those, you can put certain keys where some things can maybe become more transparent as we go down the timeline. Like, you can do all sorts of cool stuff while compositing. Putting a little vignette, then I have like an orange line, changing the blending mode of that, putting that underneath. It's easier to do it all here because here it's easier to animate. Like, After Effects is used to all this stuff. You can do some of it in Clip Studio Paint as well, but depending on your computer, it might be a little too slow. You can move the background, animate that. I'll make the lights on his arm glow a little more as we go through the timeline. I can even do some of the cuts here. Yeah, it's a lot of craziness. But here's how it looked in the end before putting it into Final Cut Pro for maybe some final last edits, which is the next step. During the previous stages, when you're animating in Clip Studio Paint, you're kind of animating each cut, each scene, right? And putting that together, and then you bring it into After Effects to do all the compositing. But once all the compositing is done, you have, a bunch of scenes, a bunch of cuts, and then you put all of that together in the next step after this passes some kind of review, and that'll just be editing. Same way you'd be editing a film. You have your footage, and then you're doing cuts and putting everything together, making everything better. Sometimes you can do a little extra compositing in there. Usually it wouldn't be necessary if you did everything you needed to during the compositing stage. You already have your sounds that were created during the part where we put the animatic together. If you need to switch some voiceover, you do it here, and then you're good. And once you're done editing, boom, that's your animation. It's done. In the last days, you can just spend that reviewing everything to make sure everything goes seamlessly, everything is on point, everyone's on the same page, the animation looks good. Sometimes these are overseen by a separate person, separate department, or a director, assistant director. Depends on how you're set up. It might be just you. And you keep adding until you're done. For the 2.5 people that made it to the end of this video, thank you. Don't forget to like this video. Holy go smash that subscribe button and hit that bell so you stay notified each time I upload absolutely anything. Turn on all notifications. Follow me everywhere, Instagram, IG, all under the same name, @WhiteManga. You can get my manga, volume 1, 2, linked in the description. If you have any questions for me, you can leave them in the comments below. Y'all enjoyed the video, right? My series is published at Saturday AM. Saturday AM is our Shonen magazine, Saturday PM is the Seinen, and Saturday Brunch is the Josei stuff. Please download our Saturday AM app. It's free. Latest issues of all our magazines are free. You have a starter guide in there. You can go read that free, and it'll tell you everything about us if you're new. Character profiles, all that. And yeah, thanks for watching, guys, and here's how the final looked.
Our Savior, the Trinity, will be born amidst the blessings of the God of Sorcery, with the lock and key of dreams to a brighter existence, forged from a loving heart. The Trinity will dawn the infinite night, a great darkness set to plague the world till it descends into oblivion. The night is nigh.